There are moments in professional sports where everything unravels in public. Not slowly. Not privately. Not in the quiet corridors of front offices where difficult conversations happen behind closed doors and the outside world never fully learns what was said. All at once. In front of everyone. And when it unravels at that speed, when the consequences arrive faster than the person causing them can process what is happening, the story that follows tends to reveal something true. About the person at the center of it. About the standards the sport holds itself to. And about the people whose names get pulled into the wreckage without asking to be there. This is one of those stories. Munetaka Murakami. One of the most celebrated hitters in Japanese baseball history. A player whose talent was never in question. A player whose numbers told a story of generational ability, the kind that scouts speak about in careful, reverent tones, the kind that crosses oceans and lands on the desks of major league front offices with the weight of something serious. That talent did not disappear. But in one press conference, in one set of remarks that the room heard clearly and the cameras captured completely, something else disappeared. The goodwill. The patience. The benefit of the doubt that exceptional talent tends to carry with it like a shield. Gone. And what followed moved faster than anyone anticipated. The Chicago White Sox, the American organization that had taken a significant chance on Murakami's transition to Major League Baseball, responded with a swiftness and a severity that sent a message to the entire baseball world. A demotion. A salary cut. A 1-year suspension. 3 consequences. Delivered together. Without ambiguity. But it was the fourth development, the quiet, devastating fourth development that arrived not from a front office or a league office but from a single individual, that truly shook the baseball world to its foundation. Shohei Ohtani refused Murakami's apology. One decision. One refusal. Delivered without drama, without a lengthy public statement, without the performance of outrage that the situation might have invited. Just a single comment. And the shockwave it sent through Japanese baseball, through the entire international baseball community, is still being felt. To understand the full weight of what happened, you have to understand who Munetaka Murakami is in the context of Japanese baseball. He is not a peripheral figure. He is not a player whose name exists only in the fine print of roster announcements. He is a phenomenon. At Yakult Swallows, Murakami established himself as the most feared power hitter in Nippon professional baseball. His 2022 season was historic in the most literal sense of the word, breaking records that had stood for decades, producing numbers that forced every serious conversation about NPB's greatest hitters to be reopened and reconsidered. He was 22 years old. He was doing things that players twice his age and with twice his experience had never done. The comparisons to Ohtani were inevitable. In Japan, when a young player produces at a truly historic level, the conversation always circles back to Ohtani, not as a criticism or a diminishment, but as the highest available frame of reference. The standard against which extraordinary talent is measured. Murakami handled those comparisons with the confidence of a player who believed in his own ability absolutely. And for a time, that confidence looked entirely justified. The path to American baseball seemed like the natural next chapter. The talent was real. The numbers were undeniable. The White Sox made their move. And then the press conference happened. There is a particular kind of mistake that is worse than an ordinary mistake. It is the kind made in public. On the record. With cameras running and microphones open and an audience present that includes not just the journalists in the room but everyone those journalists will inform in the hours that follow. Murakami's remarks at the NPB press conference were that kind of mistake. The specifics of what was said traveled quickly, as these things always do when they are serious enough to demand a response. The tone was described by those present as dismissive, contemptuous, carrying the particular edge of a person who believed that the rules of professional conduct applied to everyone in the room except themselves. It was abusive. That word, chosen carefully, applied deliberately by the people who reported on what happened, is not a word that gets attached to press conference remarks lightly. It implies a specific quality of disrespect. A specific willingness to demean. And it was directed at people who were present in that room simply doing their jobs. The reaction was not slow. There was no extended period of deliberation, no drawn-out process of assessment and consideration. The response came quickly because what happened was not ambiguous. The Chicago White Sox acted. The decision from the White Sox arrived with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. Murakami was demoted. Removed from the position and the context that his talent had earned him, placed in a situation that communicated unmistakably what the organization thought of what had occurred. His salary was cut. A financial consequence that went beyond symbolic, a concrete, measurable reduction that translated the organization's assessment of his conduct into numbers. And then the suspension. 1 year. The kind of disciplinary action that does not simply affect a season. It affects a career arc. It affects how a player is perceived by every front office that will make decisions about his future. It creates a mark in the record that does not fade quickly. 3 consequences, delivered together. The message from the White Sox was not complicated. It did not require a lengthy press release or a carefully worded statement walking through the reasoning in diplomatic language. The actions spoke with a directness that the baseball world understood immediately. This behavior is unacceptable. These are the consequences. There is no version of this situation where exceptional talent excuses what happened in that room. What happened next added another layer to a story that was already moving fast. Murakami, facing the consequences from the White Sox, facing the response from NPB, facing the public reaction that had already begun to build across Japanese media and social media simultaneously, made a declaration. He was done with Japanese baseball. The announcement landed with a particular weight. Because declarations made in the heat of a difficult moment, declarations that carry the energy of defiance, of a person pushing back against the walls closing in around them, tend to say something true about the person making them even when the specific content of the declaration is uncertain. It said that Murakami's response to consequences was not reflection. It was not accountability. It was not the measured, honest reckoning that difficult moments sometimes produce in people who are willing to look clearly at what they have done. It was a door slamming. The baseball world absorbed this. Processed it. And then waited, because there was one more chapter to this story that had not yet been written. Murakami reached out to Shohei Ohtani. An apology. Private, personal, directed at the player whose name stands at the summit of Japanese baseball, whose standard, whose reputation, whose conduct both on and off the field represents everything the sport aspires to be. An apology to that man, from a player whose behavior had just demonstrated the distance between aspiration and reality. There is a version of this story where Ohtani accepts the apology. Where the generosity that people who know him closely describe, the warmth, the humility, the genuine care for the people around him, extends even to this situation. Where he finds a way to receive what Murakami offered and respond with the grace that has defined his public character. That is not what happened. Ohtani refused. Not with anger. Not with a lengthy public statement cataloging the specific offenses and explaining in detail why forgiveness was being withheld. Not with the performance of righteous indignation that the situation might have supported. With a single comment. Quiet. Clear. Delivered with the composure that Ohtani brings to everything, but carrying within it a weight that the baseball world felt immediately. The comment said, in essence, that an apology directed at him was not the apology that was needed. That the people who had been in that room, the people who had been on the receiving end of those remarks, the people who had been demeaned and dismissed, were the ones who deserved an accounting. Not Ohtani. He had not been in that press conference. He had not been the target of those words. And he was not willing to accept an apology on behalf of the people who had been, as though his acceptance could somehow resolve what had been done to them. That refusal, that single, precise, quietly devastating comment, said something about Ohtani that no highlight reel has ever captured. Stand back from the specifics of this story for a moment and consider what Ohtani's response actually represents. He is the most famous Japanese athlete in the world. He is the player whose name carries more weight in international baseball than any other. An apology directed at him carries a different kind of currency than an apology directed at a journalist in a press conference room. Accepting it would have been easy. It would have generated positive coverage, the magnanimous superstar extending grace to a young player who made a terrible mistake. It would have given Murakami a path forward. It would have allowed the story to move toward resolution quickly. Ohtani saw all of that clearly. And he chose differently. Because accepting an apology from someone who hurt other people, accepting it as though his acceptance constituted some kind of resolution, would have said something Ohtani was not willing to say. It would have said that the feelings of the people actually harmed by those remarks were secondary to the comfort of the person who caused the harm. It would have said that the right relationship to apologize to, the right currency to spend, was the famous one. The powerful one. Ohtani refused to be used that way. The single comment he made redirected everything back to where it belonged, to the people in that press conference room who deserved an honest, direct, personal accounting from Murakami. Not a strategic apology directed at the most famous name available. The shockwave was immediate. In Japan, where Ohtani's standing transcends sport and enters the territory of genuine cultural reverence, his refusal was debated and analyzed with the seriousness usually reserved for significant institutional decisions. Sports commentators, cultural analysts, former players, all of them weighing in on what the refusal meant and what it said. The overwhelming response was one of respect. Not just for the decision itself, but for the reasoning behind it. For the clarity of the principle Ohtani was applying. For the fact that he did not use the moment for his own benefit, did not accept the apology and generate the warm coverage that acceptance would have produced, but instead redirected attention toward the people who actually needed it directed toward them. Internationally, the story traveled fast. Baseball media in America covered it with the attention that any Ohtani story receives. But it was picked up more broadly than the typical baseball news cycle, because it was not really a baseball story. It was a story about accountability. About what genuine responsibility looks like. About the difference between managing a reputation and actually doing the right thing. There are two players at the center of this story. And the contrast between them, in this specific moment, stripped of talent and statistics and everything that makes the baseball world pay attention, is almost unbearably clear. Murakami, facing consequences, reached for the most powerful name available. Directed his apology upward. Toward the figure whose acceptance would carry the most weight and generate the most visible path toward redemption. Ohtani, receiving that apology, declined to make himself the center of something that was never really about him. Pointed back toward the people actually hurt. Refused to allow his name to function as a shortcut around genuine accountability. One player, in this moment, revealed a calculation. The other revealed a character. Talent is visible. It shows up in numbers and highlights and the reactions of crowds in full stadiums. It is easy to assess and easy to admire. Character is quieter. It shows up in moments that are not designed to be witnessed. In private decisions. In the choice made when no choice is required, when the easier path is available and clearly marked and the harder path demands something that comfort would prefer to avoid. Shohei Ohtani did not have to refuse that apology. He could have accepted it graciously and moved on, and the baseball world would have applauded his generosity and the story would have found its comfortable resolution. Instead he said, quietly and clearly and without drama, that the people who were actually hurt were the ones who deserved to be thought about first. That single comment traveled around the world. Because the world recognized it immediately for what it was. Not a famous athlete managing a situation. A person, standing on a principle. Quietly. Without performance. Without asking for recognition. Simply because it was right.